Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Ian Symes has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Andrew.
Looking forward to hearing your story. We've got a good 35 minutes to spend with each other today. Please tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and where your current focus is.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Ian Symes. I've had a quite varied career by choice. I spent the first 15 years of my career in consumer products, transitioned through consulting into technology, and then the last 14, 15 years I've spent leading businesses essentially in professional services. And currently I'm CEO of a business called OnePoint Advisory Services. We are focused on accountancy and wealth management in the mid-market in the UK.
Super. Thank you. And when you are not working, because I know you work extremely hard, but you do take some time off, what is it that you would choose to do when you're not working?
Well, actually, not working, I always tell people, who work in my teams, is you've got to take your leisure time appropriately and your time off, because actually then you add more to the business. It's important you feel refreshed. So personally, I have rediscovered golf in a big way. So I really enjoyed that at the weekend. And my wife and I ski a lot, so we do take disproportionate amount of our holidays in the winter, to enjoy that. But an outdoor lifestyle. We, live in the country, very lucky to be in a beautiful part of Hampshire, and just really enjoy being outside. So great that the winter's finally gone and the spring's here.
I'm near Liverpool. It didn't feel like that today, but I know what you mean. We've got a bit of sunshine, which is lovely. Thank you, Ian, for that introduction, and we'll get to know more about the journey you described as we go through today. So let's start where our audience is very interested in where it starts, and just start in our childhood about how we're shaped. We obviously know there's nature and nurture going on. Take us back to your world when you were growing up.
Yeah. So I was very lucky. I went to a really good school, which was a private school, which my parents funded. And actually, I think, like most people who go to private school, their parents are spending all their discretionary income on that. And you only realize that when you get older, is how lucky you were. Very good school, very competitive environment. And I think that really drove me. And I remember going to university and I was quite surprised how people weren't quite as competitive, had to adjust to that. But I think, one of my learning moments actually transitioning from those school days is I didn't do great on my A levels. Long story, but didn't do great. And I haven't got the grades. I've got 3 A levels, haven't got the grades to go into my first choices, and I'm into the clearing system. And I remember my dad said to me, "Don't wait, take responsibility for this. So go and hit the phones." So I remember borrowing a meeting room in the business he worked, and I hit the phones for a day. And I think I spoke to 30 different universities. And by the end of the day, I had 3 offers, which was a really good learning point for me, is that a setback is only that. It's only a setback. Then you've got to take responsibility for it. Take responsibility for it. You can get a very good outcome. I was at the end of that day, I was in a better position than most of my friends because I had 3 offers and I could choose. Most of them had 2 offers at best, or maybe 1 offer. So really good learning point about taking personal responsibility for the challenge and moving forward rather than actually just being stuck around it.
Super. And obviously coming from that kind of family environment, as well as the competitiveness, what are the things do you think you were armed with to go into the sort of university and workplace?
Well, I think a couple of things, really. I was very lucky. I was always interested in business. My father was a CEO of a duty-free business, big business. They started in shipping. So when the days of, used to do the duty-free ferries, they ran all the duty-free on those. You ran duty-free on a lot of the large cruise line ships. And then my dad would take them into airports. Heathrow, he had all the franchises on there, taking them out to Australia. And actually, one of the interesting things for me is I used to do vacation work. I was quite lucky. I used to do it, and I got very interested and worked all sorts of different departments. But I do remember the company had just got the concession for Toronto Airport, and I was one of 30 people that was over there to help for a week to get it set up. And I do remember the existing franchisee came out at midnight, and then we had until 6 a.m. to clear all the stores, of which there were 3 at Toronto Airport, put all new merchandising up, restock it, and get it open to start trading at 7 a.m. with systems and everything. And I can always remember at 6:50 in the morning, my dad, who was CEO, and he was CEO of this is a big global business. My dad picked up a brush and he was sweeping the floor, in that shop at 6:50 because there wasn't anybody else to do it. And I think that's really important learning lesson for me is that at some point as a leader, you have to be part of the team as well. That is the core thing. And I'm really proud about my dad, but my dad, there was no issue about my dad. It was just like, someone needs to sweep the floor. There's nobody here. I'm going to sweep the floor. I've always looked back to that and thought I never ask anybody to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself.
And this doesn't always happen for everybody, but for some it does. Even though you're growing up in that kind of environment, and you've said a few times now, you were lucky in terms of some of the things that happened to you in that sense. And I know we make our own luck as well, but can you remember the earliest point that you had a dream of some sort?
Yeah, I think I was lucky because of my dad's job. We used to get to travel, for holidays fairly early. So I remember going to the US when I was 5, going to New York, and I think just being amazed, by the scale of things, by people's interactions, by business, and I got really excited about business. I just loved the whole idea about people transacting, working together, building wealth, which is not necessarily for individuals, but just in terms of creating that prosperity. And I think that stuck with me, all through, my life, which is, I suppose, when I went to university, it was all about compete, compete, compete. You always got to be better, always be better. And so I find it quite strange that a lot of people came from different backgrounds and didn't want to compete. And you have to learn to adjust to that and understand people's motivations and my own motivation. I said, I'll be quite honest, one of the things I get bored easily. So, I love new things. One of the reasons I've transitioned to lots of different industries is like I like the different challenge, something else. And when I was at uni, I was reading chemistry. I got a little bit bored with it, to be honest. And actually, you're coming up to finals. I'd done very well in my previous 2 years, but I wanted to do really well. And I recognized in myself that just doing the revision, I was going to get bored and I was not going to be able to stay tuned in. So I found a way to challenge myself in terms of, I had this hypothesis, which actually proved to be true, is that at that time, most of the lecturers we had been lecturing in the same university for the last 20 years. So my thought was, well, just a minute, all the papers are available for the last 20 years. I can go and analyze those. So I went and analyzed 20 years worth of papers across 6 different subjects. And it was, can I beat the system? Could I work out which questions were going to be set this year? And it worked for me. And actually it helped me learn because I knew then which were the bits I was going to learn. So I still came out knowledgeable, but I learned something about myself. I needed to find a way that actually made me engaged, and got me excited, because just being bright, or good at a subject doesn't mean you get a good outcome. You've got to find a way to actually motivate yourself. And for me, motivating myself was, can I beat the system? And I could beat the system, but it still got a good outcome. It wasn't a dishonest way of doing it, but it was just about, I need to find a way to motivate myself in a different way.
Yeah, so self-awareness at that early age. And so you graduated, and obviously your father was in this big CEO role. You'd seen, the kind of impact that he could have, in that kind of role. Just talk to us then at that age, what was going through your mind about what was going to be set out for you. Was it clear? Was it a bit foggy? Just talk to us about that.
Well, no, I think I changed actually. I pivoted. I think when I went into university, I think I had this intention to become a chartered accountant because my dad had been a finance guy. He'd gone up through the ranks that way. I saw a lot of other people. That was the natural way. I was very enumerate. And then I think I decided after doing 3 years of chemistry, I didn't want to spend 3 years studying again and being examined. And I realized as well, I recognized I was more interested in the sales and marketing area. So I started studying in marketing. I found a job in a consumer products company in gardening products down in the New Forest. And that's where I started. And it was I remember at the time you think, because it was a really small salary, I can remember I was paid £6,500, and I was a little bit annoyed about it because I think everybody else I knew was starting jobs was starting almost double that. But the learning I had in those first 2 years was absolutely, fabulous. Worked for the sales and marketing director, who after 6 months he transitioned to become the MD of the company, and suddenly there I am at 22, 23 years old, and I'm responsible for marketing across the business. And I've got a product range of 1,000 products. I'm dealing with all the different suppliers. I'm doing all the packaging. I'm doing the advertising, PR, everything. So for 2 years, absolutely intense learning experience, which was fabulous, which I think at the time I thought, oh, I feel I'm being abused here because they're not paying me very much. But actually, I look back to it now, it's like it was the cheapest training you could ever have. And it allowed me to make that transition to something else. So I went to work for Zanussi, which was a big brand in the 1980s and 90s, as a product marketing manager. I was responsible for home laundry and dishwashings. There became time I became very boring. I could tell you anything about how a washing machine worked or a dishwasher worked. And unfortunately, you get a lot of people at parties telling you how theirs is broken down. But it was, again, a great company, was really very focused. We were a very big brand in the market with consumers, but also the retail trade. But part of a bigger group in terms of Electrolux. And the interesting thing for me, which I hadn't thought about when I took the job, is I'm managing a large range of products, and I've actually got to work with all the manufacturing units. So, I traveled a lot. And I think I remember the first time I went across to the manufacturing center in a place called Pordenone, which is in northeast Italy, north of Venice. And I thought, when I came back from that trip, I thought I'll stop in Venice. I may never get a chance again, not realizing I'd be there every 2 weeks for the next 5 years. So, but it did I had a great experience of working with people from different cultures, because I was working with people with factories in Italy, in Scandinavia, in Germany, actually in the US as well. And I think up until that point, as my Canadian aunt would have called me, I would have been a bit of a stuffed shirt Brit. I was very straight, didn't only ate certain foods, etc. And then you learn and embrace the cultural diversity that you work in. And I loved it. It was just fabulous working with people from different cultures and learning how to work with them. As much as my wife used to tease me, I developed what we call Euro English, because you've got all these colleagues who are learning English, but actually they're learning it as a foreign language. So the vocabulary is quite truncated. And therefore I had to learn quite quickly to speak English with a smaller vocabulary and with shorter sentences, because otherwise I'm not helping myself to be understood. So it was a really great time, and I did 5 years doing that, and then I got an opportunity to go and work for a smaller company in the pet product sector. That was interesting, not my best move, and I got poached back to go and work for the Electrolux Group for another 5-6 years. The interesting thing for me, actually, going to work in that smaller business, a learning point, is I took what I thought was big company learning, what I'd learned, into a small company environment, and it didn't work. So I was there were some talent issues, and I was sales and marketing director. There were some talent issues in the team, and the big company learning was, hey, let's see how we can develop these people, help them change, etc. And in actual fact, there were 2 or 3 people who really shouldn't have been in the business. And it was as much it was a painful 6 months, it was a good, learning point for me.
And Ian,
One
can
of
I
the
just ask
things,
you that? That's
yes.
just really interesting, that point, because, and again, this is where we're sort of trying to dip into what you were like as you were growing up as well. So obviously you're going into a smaller company, the competitive nature about being the best is still there, and yet you've got resources which you wouldn't necessarily have had about there. So how did you first try and adjust before then recognizing that it wasn't there, and bear in mind, what you were like and what you were trying to achieve? What kind of things did you do?
Well, I think so. Like most things as leaders, what you need to do is listen to people, and that's what I started to do. Meet the team, listen to them, listen to their aspirations, and understand what they thought about the business. At the same time, as you're trying to assess it and make a strategic, view about where the business needs to go and how to actually do it. So that bits was all fine. That bit worked. Where I guess the train wreck happened is like, okay, now I need to start helping people align to this journey, sharing it with them, etc. And then you hit the problems in terms of, well, yeah, I don't work that way. Yeah, I was promised we'd work somewhere a different way. I haven't changed for the last 10 years. I'm not going to change now. It's just like, wow. And I think when you hit as a lead, you get one or two people in the team like that, you can manage it. I think I walked into a team where 90% of the team were like that. And then it's really tough because now you're going to, okay, what do I know? What am I falling back on? In terms of my experience and my training that says how to deal with this situation. And I think I was quite ill-equipped probably at that time in my career to deal with that situation. So when I got the call back, after a few months to try and poach him back, it was quite an easy decision.
Just
So
talk to us about,
I felt I'd landed maybe in the wrong place.
Yeah, and this is because that's probably, from what I've heard from you, probably the first major setback, if we can call it that, since your A-levels in that sense, even though that turned out right. So even though you had the road back, how did that feel for you at that point? How did you cope with that sense of, you want to achieve, it's about, where you were growing up and how that felt? How did you actually cope with that setback?
It was, I think, two things. When you first address it, it's pretty challenging. I was very focused. I'm going to make this work, and that's what I came back to, every day. And I think partly talking to my manager then, who's the CEO of the business, sharing that feedback, which was not dissimilar to what his view is. He hadn't shared that with me when I joined, which I was a little bit disappointed about. But I think coming out of that, quite quickly, because I got a phone call and I've been there for 3-4 months. And for part of me at that moment when I took that phone call was, no, I don't want to do that. I committed to this. I've never done anything that's not successful. I'm not being able to turn into a success. Do I want to walk away from this now? But then you also got to have that, I think, balance when you look at your career and thinking, yeah, but is that better for me? Don't just play it because I have to win. Play it in terms of the long game, where do you want to go, and what do you want to do?
So you went back?
I did, and that was really interesting. So I went back to lead the marketing team, of which I'd been a part. And the guy I'd worked for before was a fabulous marketeer, not a great people leader, but a fabulous marketeer. A lot of people found it difficult to work for him, found it quite aggressive. I'd established a really good working relationship with him because I'd pushed back straight away. And then it'd been all good. So when I came in to lead this team, what I wanted to do was to try and bring the team together and operate it more as a team. And I remember after about 3-4 months, I actually brought a leadership consultant in and said, look, I need you to help me. How do I bring this team together, about 15 people, and get them to operate more as a team? Because I felt if we could do that, we would probably be twice as good as we actually were. And I remember going this 2-day off-site. We had the whole team for one day and then just the senior managers for the second day. And then we had some honest feedback between the leaders and including me. And I think it was one of these things where you write a line on a piece of paper about something and fold it and then pass it on to the next person. And I got this feedback from one of my team members, and she said, "You're competing with us. I feel like you're competing with us." And that was a real aha moment for me. I think because I was so driven, whether it was my intention or not, I was making people feel like I was trying to be better than them all the time. And that was a good moment for me to step back and say, okay, I need to change my leadership style here. I need to, as much as I want to drive and I want to be ambitious, I need to actually be more of the coach in this environment and help them be successful, as opposed to thinking just driving harder is going to get us to it.
That's a great moment, isn't it? Where had you not had that consultant in to manage that day, it could have been another 3, 6, 9, 12 months before somebody even told you that. In that sense,
I think they probably wouldn't have told me. I worked in a business that was very performance driven, in the sales team, etc. And it was quite an aggressive environment in some ways from that point of view. So I don't think that would have ever come out without that moment. So that was a really useful, and I'm very grateful for that individual for being honest enough to actually say that's how that they felt.
Talk us through what happened next.
Well, I think it's enough. I said did about 5-6 years with Electrolux Group, then went from different roles. I guess went in the traditional up the tree. Went from heading up marketing for Zanussi to head up marketing for Electrolux in the UK. Then headed up marketing for Electrolux across, I think, 6 markets in Europe. And then the business was going through a transition, and it was quite interesting for me. I was observing some senior managers two people I reported into, really not behaving the way that I thought was appropriate for the company. They were far more interested in terms of their careers than the business and the people who work for them. And I came to a conclusion after a while, particularly I worked for one guy, I think he was on his 4th marriage. He was only in early 40s and he had kids scattered across Europe. And I thought, I don't want that to be me. If that's what's required to be at the next level, that's not me. And so I left the business, left on good terms, and I set up a marketing and strategy consultancy. I don't think I had any grand ideas at that point about create, but I just I want to get some. I've been working in the appliance sector for 11 years. I knew everything about it. And as is my boredom threshold, it's just like, I need to learn something. So consultancy was a really interesting way for me to actually get multi-sector experience. And I worked through multiple clients in consumer, in B2B and technology. But it was an interesting ride. I remember the worst point in the journey was probably at 9/11. At 9/11, so you're running a small consultancy, you've got a couple of people, plus you've got quite a few other people freelance working for you. And 9/11 happens, and the consultancy world just came to a grinding stop. I mean, literally stopped, because nobody knew what was the new world order, what was going to happen. And so everybody stopped spending money. And I say it was a tough time. I think we went through 6 months, no business coming through the door at all. And I do remember pitching for a piece of business with and I was one of 10 agencies pitching this. And normally you wouldn't do a beauty parade because it's a waste of time. You spend all your time. But actually, there was literally no work in the marketplace. And somebody approached me, and I won this piece of business. And it was a bit of a godsend. I always remember I'd taken my dad, who was retired at that time. I'd taken him to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. And I got the phone call while we were actually watching the athletics on a Saturday evening to say we won the piece of business. And that was a really interesting an opportunity for me, because one, it taught me about, okay, do I really want to be in this scenario? Because my wife is a PR consultant, with 2 of some consultants, we've got school fees, mortgages, etc. The nature of consultancy is a roller coaster ride in terms of your income. And I thought, well, I'll think about this the next couple of years, see how it goes. But I actually got to do some really interesting projects. I did a lot for Cisco in the UK, Europe and North America, which I'll come back to. But my interesting day in consulting, I was doing some work for a client, and it was a joint venture. It had been set up by one of the big 4 and another company, and essentially was a company called Midas, and they'd been set up by PwC and EDS for the BBC to outsource their transaction processing. And they set up a really good quality business, in doing this. But I was speaking to them, and they wanted to know, was there an opportunity to actually, sell this service to other clients? And I went to do a big piece of work for them, which they paid for, did quite a lot of research, did some interviews, particularly in the charity sector, with all videoed with CFOs, etc. And then I remember going to present to the board, and I'm presenting to the board, and the chairman, who I won't mention by name, was asleep after 60 seconds, literally asleep. And then nobody else was really engaged, because they didn't have a burning platform. They had a successful business. They kept on getting more money from the BBC. Everybody hit their bonus every year. So, other than my sponsor, there wasn't any interest. And I remember going back home that evening and talking to my wife, and I was so frustrated. I'd done this great piece of work. There was a huge opportunity for them. I presented this. They weren't engaged. I was so frustrated. More frustrated, not about their lack of interest, but that they wouldn't take the opportunity and run with this. And I told my wife this, and my wife said, "Did you get paid for today?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "It's a good day in consulting." And at that moment, I realized I didn't want to be a consultant anymore.
But you did it. You tried it. Otherwise, you wouldn't know.
No. And I think that's it. I think I've always recognized I'm a doer. I like getting my hands dirty. I like doing things, and consulting have to accept it's the nature of a relationship with clients. Is the clients at the end of the day going to decide what they want to do? And actually, that was a really good learning point. So I'd been working for Cisco. I'd been doing some work, quite a lot of work in Europe, and I went to do some work for them in the US. And my client in the US turned around to me at the end and said, "Well, would you come and work for us?" And long story short, I thought, yes, good. I like this. I'll go and do it. I'd always wanted to work in California. But I think I'd been there when I was about 13. I'd fallen in love with California. And so I went to California for a couple of years. Big decision for us as a family, because my wife and I took the decision that for our daughter's schooling, it was best not to take them to the US. And we got a lot of advice around that, both from UK schools, but also educators in California who said, look, your girls are not going to be in the same stream when they come back. So I became the migrant worker. So I went to the US. I did a global role. So they were very good. They allowed me to come back about every 8 weeks. So I could spend a week with the family. But it was tough, particularly for my wife, I have to say, because she's looking after the kids, she's running her own business, and now she's doing everything else, as well. But I'd say I had a fantastic time in California. Really loved it. Opened my eyes to a different working culture. I think partly from being in technology, but also I think there's a quite a different can-do culture in the US generally, and it's different between different states. But in California, it really is a can-do. And I always remember we were having a discussion about one particular project over there, and I asked, can we do this? I got the response, you can do it. The only question is time and money. There's no other, and it was quite honest. There was no sarcasm in that. It was just, no, we can absolutely do this. It's just a question of how much money you want to spend and have you got time, to get it done. So fabulous opportunity. Enjoyed a couple of years there. Transitioned back with Cisco into the UK. Took on a role went back into pure marketing as marketing director of the UK and Ireland business with lovely big business, about 1.2 billion, and also picked up the responsibility for Cisco sponsorship for the marketing side of the London 2012 Olympics, which was just an amazing experience. I would say to anybody who's in the marketing arena, if you ever get a chance to work on something like that or a big project, go and do it. Because not only is it a major thing you can do in terms of marketing, it's a fabulous team experience. We had probably about 50 or 60 of us from the UK in total across the business working on this. We built a temporary 2-story, 30,000 square foot building on top of Westfield Shopping Centre, overlooking the entrance to the Olympic Park. We ran for 6 months. We had 13,000 invited guests over the sort of 4 months running up to Olympics, and Cisco's top clients, during the Olympics. We created an additional $1 billion worth of sales pipeline. And I got to host Dr. Henry Kissinger for the day. I mean, you can't really get better than that.
Good. So talk us then through the last decades, all the multicultural experience you gained on with Electrolux, and you see the States experience, the working alone over there without the family, and then coming to this point of having a very large business that you're running the marketing for. That all culminates then in terms of that last decade of how you were as a leader and what you were learning then in terms to really sustain performance.
Yeah, so interesting for me at that stage, and I'd always want to transition into general management. Running your own business, you do to a certain extent, but on a small scale. And the way that the technology industry was set up wasn't aligned to a marketing moving transition into a general management role. So I'd been approached by a headhunter I knew quite well about moving into a different sector. A business called Right Management, which is part of the Manpower Group, and taking over their UK business, which was about a £20 million business, was profitable, but not as profitable as it could be, and described as quite sleepy in terms of old-fashioned. And for me, it's thought, if on doing the Cisco thing, once you've done Olympics, you can't go back to the day job. You just cannot go back to the day job. And interesting enough, the three of us, the senior people who ran the Olympic sponsorship in the different ways, everybody left within 3 months of the Paralympics finishing, because you just can't go back to the day job when you spend the day with Henry Kissinger. It just doesn't quite feel the same. But yes, I went to this business called Right Management. Wonderful business, placement, career management, talent management. very nice business in the UK, and also had a very separate business in the UK with a contract for the military. So did all the career transition for the military for 24 years in total until about 2 years ago, and went in there. And actually that was a really good opportunity. I guess two things. One is to learn how to manage stakeholders in a different way, because when you've got the P&L responsibility, it is different in terms of stakeholders in a large group or what their expectation is. At the same time, now you've got all these different teams, with you, whether it's not just the marketing, you've got the sales team, you've got the delivery team, you've got all the back of office functions, etc. And actually, that's what I always wanted to do, is that how do you orchestrate and, bring this orchestra together of all these players, in service, of a single ambition, a single mission. And it was a really interesting few years for me. I spent 3 or 4 years doing the UK, really turning that round. We took it up, almost doubled the profitability in that business and got it growing. I was lucky then. I got promoted to run the European business, and then did the transformation across Europe as well, and really leveraging then my experience from earlier in my career, how to work with different cultures. And then I got a call saying, would you help us run North America for a period of time? And that was a fantastic 2 years where I spent still running Europe and still running, and then running North America and running a transformation in North America. And as much as we changed the business model in North America, we went from a bricks and mortar, because we'd always been pushed by our competitor, and we had 50 offices across the US, and I closed 47 later, and a big transformation. How do you get the team to work together, go through that transformation when they'd never done that? They'd been really pushed, squeezed all the time. To a very changed environment, and difficult for me as well. I was out the country for those 2 years, 7 months a year. I lived on an airplane. I was heavier than I am now as well, because it's not the best lifestyle, but pure adrenaline. Just absolutely love it. And I do remember at the time coming back home one weekend and seeing my dad, and my dad said, "You've got to stop this." And I said, "Why?" He said, "You're going to drop dead." He said, I traveled a lot. He said, but this is too much. You've got to stop. Unfortunately, we went through that phase, having done the transformation. We brought somebody in to run North America, and then I got to run the business globally. But I bit like being at Electrolux as an OC. It's like I got the T-shirt then. I'd run Right Management for 10 years, turned it into a really fun business, with some fabulous people, both in the business, and also we had a lot of external consultants worked with us globally. But I felt, I needed to move on for that next phase. And I stepped into a different environment, and a smaller AIM-led business with, again, a different set of stakeholders. Now you're talking about, the stock market, shareholders, working in a team where, a couple of people have been in the business their whole life, and they are predominant shareholders in the business. So very different environment in terms of K3 Capital Group. Lovely company, very successful. And then the mission changed. Only 4 months in, board decided we want to sell it to private equity. Okay. So that's a different mission. And again, fantastic learning experience, in terms of how you go through this process. Very regulated, because we're on the stock market. And we have this called the rule of 6. You can talk to 6 buyers at any point in time. You have to go through, report back to the stock market who you're meeting. You have to be chaperoned on every meeting, etc. So a very interesting experience. We went through that process, found a buyer, took it through, and then really we came to a point where too many cooks in the kitchen, which was an interesting point for me as well, and then transitioned out of there. But learned a lot, I think, about a different type of professional service. Had worked in the HR space before, and now working more on this accounting and A space. And really found that fascinating, and how this market has changed as well. And then I went to work for a group called Kimbrook, which was a mid-market private equity-backed accountancy group. Very interesting environment. Most markets in my career I worked in are fairly slow moving. Even technology, to a certain extent, is slow moving. It's fairly steady. I work in an industry now where it's gone crazy in terms of the amount of investment coming in. There's 40 private equity backed accounting groups currently in the UK, and everybody's trying to buy the same businesses. So it's a very different environment, and now I've got different stakeholders in terms of trying to buy businesses. How do I make our value proposition, align with people we're trying to buy, as well as everything else you're trying to do in the business in terms of coach people, develop people. We really built quite quickly Kinbrook from 35 million to 100 million. And then at the beginning of this year, I joined another group called OnePoint, which is another P-backed accountancy group with a very different value proposition. Really appealed to me. What OnePoint recognizes is what has made mid-market accountancy practices great in terms of their relationships with clients is what will make them great in the future. So in our market of those 40 private equity-backed businesses, at one end, which is called pure aggregator, there's gobble everything up, rebrand it as one brand. You get a playbook, how you operate your office, and that's it. Ours is very different. Ours is, no, we're here to help you be successful. So you're going to keep your brand. You're going to keep an ownership level in your brand, and you'll be able to trade those shares between you as well. And what my team in the center is here, we're here to coach you. We're here to help you be successful. So I sort of feel it's a culmination, of everything I've learned over the last few decades in terms of now how do I actually help and coach people. I'm not driving the business. I'm not delivering. Yes, I provide a level of governance around it, and I represent the investors. My success is not driven by me. I don't run any of these businesses, but I am there to help them. I am there to coach them. I'm there to give them advice, experience, share some war stories, be a shoulder to cry on when it's a problem. And if you look at, interesting enough, our website and actually one of our private equity investors' website, they talk about we're a friend. That is what we're trying to be, to these businesses. We're not trying to be a nasty big investor saying you've got to hit your numbers, you've got to hit your numbers, you've got to get numbers. We're saying, what do you need? What is it that's holding you back? So a really interesting journey from me, I think starting from that point where I was very driven, very operations driven. And I'd be the first person kicking down the door and running through it every time. Through to now, no, I'm here to help you, but I'm not kicking down the door. You guys have got to kick down. And if you can't kick down the door, I'll come with you. But I'm not gonna tell you to kick down the door. It's your choice if you kick down the door.
So one last question for you before we let you go, Ian. Bear in mind we're all start, and you referred to it now in terms of you're coaching, you're not doing the doing. But personally, what's the one thing that you still want to achieve in life that maybe you've not achieved yet?
A golf handicap is single figures.
What are you now?
16.
16. Okay, yeah, no, well, we'll take a little bit more time, maybe to get down. It's definitely possible, isn't it?
It is definitely possible. I have been down, but I've gone back up again. But it's one of those. It's an interesting. I love the sport. I love the sport, watching it. I love playing it. I love being out with people. But I love the fact that you're playing actually more against yourself. So it is a psychological game. Is how do you learn to actually control your own emotions and actually focus on the things that matter. So I find that quite fascinating because it's like I'm playing myself. It's like it's a double person caught up in here.
Well, for those that are listening to this who've been golfing longer than you, of which I have, what I will definitely tell you now, which we can both relate to in terms of where we've come from and what our lives have been like, is that the more that we try to be successful at golf, the less successful we are. So on that note, I think we should finish. Ian, thank you very much for your time today. It's been lovely hearing your journey, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.